Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name is Stuart. The March of Chaos is the latest Arcane journal for Warhammer the Old World. Let's take a look.
Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Counter-Attack Bases. They stock a wide range of counters, gaming aids and movement trays for multiple game systems, and offer custom items to suit your club, your event, or even your podcast or YouTube channel. Check out the link in the video description.
This Arcane journal is absolutely packed. We have lore, as you'd always expect, a narrative scenario, we have an army of infamy, we have new profiles, new magic items, and some new ways to play magic in the game as well that are optional. So there's loads and loads of stuff to get through, so let's get started. The lore in this book continues to focus around Westerland and the war in the north, with the arrival of the Storm Dragon and the Cathayan troops to aid the Empire in their fight against Friedel's invasions. There's some absolutely wonderful artwork right at the start of the book. We see Miao Ying here in dragon form fighting against that new Chaos Dragon, which is also now in miniature form with the Sorcerer as the mount there. And the war is a little bit of a rehash of the things that we've already covered, a little bit of a setting the scene or resetting the scene. I think if you own all of these Arcane journals, you will find certain paragraphs and certain sections a bit repetitive. However, we also need to realise not everyone will purchase every single book and maybe picking this up to go with their Chaos armies. That said, there are little bits of extra detail, a few lines here and there that shows the relationship between Marienburg and Reichland and some of the politics there, but there's not an awful lot, just a bit of a tease of what we may see in the future. Of course, with it being a Chaos-themed Arcane journal, we get extra lore to do with the Warriors of Chaos as well, including talk for the first time in any detail around the Shardlands and some of the fortresses that exist there with Chaos Warriors in them. And it feels like we're moving away from those tribes a little bit, while Path to Glory is still mentioned, further north into those realms where the Chaos Warriors exist themselves within their fortresses. A little bit more chaotic. We're starting to move from that sort of lower fantasy tribal type of lore into the more of the traditional Chaos Warriors that we've known for many years. And that's not to say we've jumped fully into 8th edition. It's far from that at all. It feels like we're starting to put half a foot in that kind of area. It's still the theme of the tribes from the Marauders, and those alternative god names are still very heavy in the writing here, but we're starting to see the first shoots of descriptions of those Chaos Warriors and how different they are in their fortresses to the north, and that they're starting to spill out warriors and travel south. It goes on to talk about the armour of chaos here and the well-established lore that the armour is part of the warrior, that kind of becomes part of them, that physically part of them is mentioned here, but with that sort of note that they're not fully sure whether that's always the case or just it being a symbolic way of talking about it. It moves on to a couple of pages exploring some of the more well-known areas of the Shardlands themselves, and again it does really feel a little bit more chaotic, a little bit more Chaos Warrior rather than tribe, which is what you'd expect from this book, but also really nice to see, especially for anyone that's a little bit concerned about the identity of chaos changing. I don't think it is quite as much. There's some pretty cool colour plates here, which I think has one foot in the old and one foot in the new in terms of the look. We've got a nice bright red banner there, which is very more old school, cornate style, but the banners on the page opposite are much more dulled down and diluted. They're all of a grey, and it's only the actual devices on them themselves which show which chaotic god, and then they're under the tribal names for them rather than the true names for those gods. I know some people prefer to use the true names, and that's absolutely fine as well. You'll easily be able to get hold of those transfers from other kits that Games Workshop makes if you wanted to go down that route, I think. Next up is one of my favourite things in the book, and it's so small and so subtle, but I really like the extra detail that has been added here. It doesn't give anything to the actual physical game at all. There's not even that much written lore here, but we have the Dark Ton and all the phonetic runes that are included. And this is the same, I think, or most of it is the same as first presented in the 6th edition Beastmen book. So some of this stuff is really cool to see return. We then return to some more lore, and this lore builds in towards the narrative scenario, and it's a format that we've seen repeated again and again in these Arcane journals. And so we have the March of the Warriors. Again, there's some retelling of older tales here that have been in Arcane journals, sometimes just from a slightly different perspective, sometimes just expanding upon it a little bit and giving it new meaning and new detail, but also within the context of this book and what this book is trying to do. It feels like they're trying to slowly express that the ante is upping slightly, that more Chaos Warriors are coming down from the north, hence all of that talk around the Shardlands, and a little bit more about the power of magic rising within the game as well. And we know there's such a heavy magical theme to the rules in this book. So while we're still talking about the Storm Dragon and talking about Holloman in this case, the second Battle of Holloman, how that war over a number of years to and fro's in the north of the Empire. It is also starting to suggest that it might not just be Friedel, or maybe she's one of just the first warriors to journey south, and this is a beginning of a rise in chaos power, and it's really starting to move that lore forward. And that rise in power is really, really interesting. I think quite welcome to see as well. We're not jumping straight into the great war against chaos, but there is a note that this is happening now. More and more people are becoming aware of it, and that it needs to be dealt with, and more of the chaos forces are realizing this is a big thing as well, not just a minor incursion, and more forces are being sent south, and the beastmen are joining as well. Another one of the themes of the book. Again, go and read the lore. It's a really good set of lore, I think, because it moves the story forward, but just very, very, very slowly. We're not jumping forward in a number of years with each of these books, but it just changed the emphasis a little bit towards that more well-known bigger power of chaos rather than just the tribal nature. It's starting to edge that way. The Battle of Fort Nordenschloss is a kind of an expansion of that lore, really, as this normally happens at this stage of these books. As I've already mentioned, you get a narrative scenario that reflects the tale that's being told, and this is very much the counterattack by chaos. And we have a 3,000 points chaos army of infamy for the hordes of chaos, so the army of infamy in this book that are the attackers, and then the defenders are split. We've got 2,000 points of Empire of Man, and then a rescue force which consists of Miao Ying and 3 Sky Lanterns. After that, we have the usual beautiful center shots in the book showing off the new miniatures and illustrating the kind of stuff that's been in those narrative pages and that scenario at the same time. Sally's halfway through the book, the narrative presentation of the book that sets up the rules later on, I think is quite good. It's not groundbreaking in terms of the lore. There's not real sort of jaw-dropping moments that tell us an awful lot new. There's a counterattack by chaos, and the growing and the chaos powers is the overall theme of it that could have been told within a few paragraphs, but it's done very nicely, interlacing it with retelling a little bit of the tale of the war in the Northwest. And as I mentioned earlier on, not everyone's going to have all the books. If you buy all the books, you might be thinking, well, I want something completely new each time. Some people will just be picking up the books relevant to their armies, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think from that sense, it works really well on its own. The context of it being you're new, this is the first book you read, it works. So I need to remember that sometimes when I'm reading it and thinking, I know this stuff, because it works as a piece of writing. It's written absolutely fine. And I'm really excited that it feels like we're starting on that path towards something bigger now. Be that the Great War Against Chaos or just a really big campaign that leads up to it. We are still sort of 18 years away from that at this point. I'm not sure we're going to jump straight into it in the next book, but the momentum's starting to turn towards that, and we're seeing that there's more magic now. Magic users and advisors to the Empire are starting to realise something's going on here. This is a big thing, rather than that sleepy Empire we had when the game launched, where they were warring between themselves and didn't really know what was going on. So it does feel like a bit of the start of a narrative shift, and I think that's pretty cool. The next section really links with that lore, that rise in the winds of magic because of all these chaos invasions, and that step forward in the lore. And we have 3 new types of winds of magic rules within the game, and ways of adding different ways of playing magic and expanding magic in your games of Warhammer the Old World, and they are all optional, and that's really important. With that rise in winds of magic, we have channeling the winds of magic, mastering arcane magic, and sorcerer's ruses. And it explains, as I've already mentioned, that they are optional and you may not want to use them all. In fact, it recommends that you don't use them all for match play games. And it says if you're organising a Warhammer the Old World match play event, you may wish to include rules for winds of magic. It is recommended that such events allow the use of either channeling or arcane magic, but not both. Sorcerer's ruses can be used in conjunction with either or alone. Whatever the case, the inclusion of these rules should be conveyed to attendees as blah blah blah. With the new types of magic, we have a disastrous miscast table meant to reflect that if you've got this higher power form of magic in the game, so if you're using arcane magic or the channeling rules, then you should be using this disastrous miscast table. Again, like anything else in any game of Warhammer, it is optional. It's up to you. If you're playing with your friends, you decide beforehand. If you're at an event, the TO will decide, and then you decide whether you want to go to an event based on what rules they are running. It's pretty simple. Now, I'm not going to read this new miscast table to you. There's an awful lot of text there. If you want to pause the video and read through it yourself now, if you haven't already read it from other sources, which I'm sure many of you have, you can do. But I want to keep this video to a reasonable length rather than going into the hour-plus mark. So I will leave that to you to enjoy yourself. Needless to say that there's a lot more damage that could be caused by miscasting, as you would expect. So we have those optional channeling or arcane magic, or you could really go crazy and use both if you want to, but that's not recommended. Let's take a look at what channeling is first. Channeling has some connections with 8th edition. We've seen it before in a slightly different guise. It adds the idea of a dice pool back into the game without changing the rest of the magic system, which I think is quite interesting. Obviously, by adding this in, it's making your magic potentially a lot more powerful, but you've got that miscast table to offset against it. I think a lot of people are going to like this. I quite miss the dice pool mechanic, even though I quite like the split ways of casting in different phases that we have in the old world. Now, your number of dice is to do with your wizarding level, so wizarding levels maybe come back into the game a little bit more now. So you have D3 for level 1, D3 plus 1 for 2, 2D3 for level 3, and 2D3 plus 1 for level 4, and then you can spend those channeling dice throughout the game on different things, and your pool will slowly disappear. And it looks like you have a pool for each of your dice, and you roll for this at the beginning of the game before your armies are deployed. So these are the things they do. Channeled spells: when randomly generating spells before discarding one in favour of the signature spell, a wizard may spend 1 channeling dice to re-roll one spell, re-rolling duplicates as normal. You must accept the result of the re-roll even if the spell is generated again. Channeled casting rolls: making a casting roll, a wizard can spend 1 channeling dice to channel extra power by rolling an extra d6 and discarding the lowest result. And it says, note here that the effects of a natural double 1 or a natural double 6 apply if such a result is rolled on any 2 of the dice. Channel dispel rolls: when attempting a wizardly dispel, including attempts to dispel remains in play spells during the previous turns, a wizard can spend 1 channeling dice to channel extra power. If they do so, roll an extra d6 when making the dispel roll and discard the lowest rolls, and the same thing applies in terms of doubles. Channeled luck: if a wizard fails a casting or dispel roll, they may spend 2 channeling dice to re-roll that roll. However, channeling dice cannot be used to prevent a miscast. And then range magnification: a wizard can spend 1 channeling dice to increase the range of a spell prior to choosing a target, or to increase their dispel range prior to attempting a wizardly dispel. To do so, roll the channeling dice. The result is the number of inches applied to the spell's range or the wizard's dispel range. Now, I really like that. Adds a little bit of something extra to the magic phase, adds a little bit of that resource management, which was always quite fun before. I think it's really cool. Whether the offset of the new miscast table will put people off using it, I hope not. I think it's quite cool to do that anyway, and I think maybe wizards blowing up isn't a terrible thing. Of course, you can do what you want, so you can use this without using the new miscast table as well, and add these elements in as you want. And I wonder if we'll see that quite a lot, especially in a lot of more competitive events. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw the channeling system added in without the miscast table, but we shall see. The next thing is mastering arcane magic, and that's where you're using ploys, and some of you may notice there's an arcane ploys deck. You don't need the deck. There's a table with all of the rules, and you can get the results by rolling dice, which I imagine a lot of people will do. But if you like card sets, there is a card set here. Arcane magic ploys are for wizards who think themselves powerful enough to control or predict the flow of magic, and you're either using the deck of 56 cards or a 2d6 table. They are generated after spells are generated. If you've got one deck of cards, you shuffle it and both players draw from the same deck. If you've got two decks of cards, you use your deck yourself shuffled and you draw your cards. If not, you both use dice if you do it that way. Each player generates 6 ploys, and I'm guessing that's for their army, not per wizard. And you can do that either by drawing cards I've already mentioned or by rolling on the table, and there are limits to certain results as well. So if you exceed that, you have to re-roll or return that card to the deck. Using ploys. A ploy may be used by any model able to use it, i.e. a wizard, a dwarf runesmith, which is good to see that dwarves get a little bit of something here because they can't use the channeling, or a model with a bound spell. And some ploys associated with the spelling can be used when attempting a fated spell as detailed in their descriptions. However, each player can only use one ploy per phase. Once a ploy has been used, it is discarded and cannot be used again for the remainder of the game. And we have this double page spread here with all of the rules. You've got your flavor text and then the rule for each of the ploys that is repeated on each of the individual cards as well if you're using those. And I'm guessing you could use a system where you roll for the ploys, which is probably a fairer way of doing it, less chance of unshuffled decks becoming a problem, but then you could still use the cards as your reminders, like your spell cards for what you've got to use throughout the day, and you just return the cards. That's probably the way I would go about using them. So let's go through the ploys. Towering Conjuration effectively allows you to target a spell or bound spell at a unit regardless of line of sight or range of that spell. Unseen Assailment does something similar, but for dispels you can select a wizard for a wizardly dispel within your army regardless of whether they're in range or even in combat, and still attempt that dispel. Duplicitous Duplication seems really good. It effectively means if you successfully cast a spell or a bound spell, you can immediately recast that even if it was dispelled, and you may cast it at the same unit or a different unit. This attempt does not count towards how many spells the wizard can cast in a turn as well, attempt to cast in a turn. Very good. Twist of Fate essentially means that you can re-roll on the miscast table. Winds of Fortune allows you to roll an extra d6 when you're making a wizardly or fated dispel. You discard the lowest result, which means you can also discard the lowest result if you've rolled a double 1 as well. Fated Conjuration is essentially re-rolling a failed casting roll or a miscast when you're rolling for a spell or a bound spell. Fortuitous Intervention is essentially re-rolling a dispel roll, including when you're outclassed, and you can also re-roll a fated dispel roll. Winds of Power is a bit like Winds of Fortune. You're using an extra d6 when you're making a casting roll and you're discarding the lowest. And again, you can avoid that miscast by removing the lowest dice if you've rolled a double. Unerring Confidence, if your wizard has miscast. Before you roll on the miscast table, you may choose to play this. You roll twice and then you get to choose which of the results you go with. Disillusion is the old school dispel scroll. In many ways, it effectively replaces the wizardly dispel or a fated dispel with no roll required. Absolute Power effectively turns any doubles while rolling to cast, apart from double ones, into a perfect invocation. Now, I'm a really big fan of those as well, and you absolutely could play those along with channeling at the same time if you wanted a really big, fun, magic heavy game, but by God, would it be magic heavy? You really would want to use that miscast table. If you can have loads of wizards on the table and really have some fun with it, it's another cool alternative. But of course we have more. We have sorcerers, ruses as well, and this is recommended that you use this along with one of the others, again not in addition to both of the other two things as well. And we have points for the first time. This is something you have to purchase. It's 0 to 1 wizard can do this for 25 points. Once you've paid your points, you generate these before spells have been generated using the table that you can see there. If both armies have a wizard using ruses, you take it in turns to generate them. Of course, you'll only be taking it in turns if you have more than one wizard in your army that has purchased a ruse. So number 1 is Escapeology, and if the wizard is reduced to 0 wounds, they roll a d6. On a 1 to 3, nothing has happened. The ruse hasn't paid off. On a roll of 4 or more, the wizard has managed to recover that wound, so they recover a single lost wound. Demonic Assailants. So instead of dispelling normally or attempting to dispel normally, both wizards roll a d6 and the wizard with the ruse adds their wizarding level. If the enemy wizard's result is higher, the ruse has failed and the spell is cast. If the result is a draw, the ruse is partially successful and the spell is dispelled. If the wizard's result is higher, the ruse has been a success, the spell is dispelled and the enemy wizard loses a single wound. This wound cannot be recovered by a regeneration save. Spell Thief has some similarities with the previous. When an enemy wizard casts a spell, a wizard may use this ruse instead of attempting a wizardly dispel. If they do so, both wizards roll a d6. Each wizard then divides their wizarding level by 2, rounding fractions up, and adds the result to their roll. If the enemy wizard result is higher, the ruse has failed and the spell is cast. If the result is a draw, the ruse was partially successful and the spell is dispelled. If this wizard's result is higher, the spell is flayed from the enemy wizard's mind, the spell is dispelled and the enemy wizard is unable to attempt to cast it again for the remainder of the game. Duplicitous Mirror carries on the theme. When an enemy wizard casts a spell, a wizard may use this ruse instead of attempting a wizardly dispel. If they do so, both wizards roll a d6. The wizard using this ruse adds their level of wizardry to their roll, whilst the enemy wizard adds their initiative rather than toughness with Demonic Assailants. If the enemy wizard's result is higher, the ruse has failed and the spell is cast. If the result is a draw, the ruse was partially successful and the spell is dispelled. If the wizard's result is higher, the spell is reflected back upon its caster. The spell is resolved against its caster and their unit, exactly as if they were the target of the spell. Magical Cipher. Now, a wizard may use this ruse instead of attempting a wizardly dispel. If they do so, the wizard using this ruse rolls 2d6 and adds their level of wizardry, while the enemy wizard rolls a d6 and adds their leadership. If the enemy wizard results higher, the ruse has failed and the spell is cast. If the result is a draw, the ruse is partially successful and the spell is dispelled. If the wizard result is higher, the spell is dispelled, along with any other enemy spells currently in play. Finally, Spell Eater. When an enemy wizard casts a spell, a wizard may use this ruse instead of attempting a wizardly dispel. If they do so, the spell is automatically dispelled with no dispel roll required. If the spell was cast with perfect invocation, the wizard may attempt to dispel it normally by making a dispel roll. If they roll a natural double 6, the spell is dispelled. In addition, the next time this wizard makes a casting roll after this ruse, they may unleash the power of a consumed spell by rolling an extra d6 and discarding the lowest result. If the double 1 is resolved, the miscast can be avoided by discarding one of those dice. Those are pretty fun as well, and reading each of those sections on their own, I'm left thinking that's a really fun thing to add to Magic. Sitting back, having read them all, I'm thinking, which ones do I like best? Which ones do I want to use? Because they all have some fun and have some merit, and I like them. And I don't know what is best. And I think that's the most important thing now, is that as players we go away and try them out and see which works best in our games. And they may not be the same as it works best in your friends' games, or some will work better for events, some will work better at home, and some people will go crazy and just want to use them all. And I can see that being really fun. You go for that really big magical focus style game where all of your characters are magic users and really go for it and have lots of fun with it. Brilliant stuff. I don't know, really. I have no idea. It does feel a lot. I suppose that's the only negative, is it makes me wonder why there's what seems like a lot of ideas here are all being presented in one book. It's not a negative. That's probably the wrong way of putting at it, but it's definitely a lot and confusing for some people about, well, what should I do? What can I do? And I think this is why they're optional extras. If these were just added to the game now, that you must choose one of the three, or two of the three, then it gets maybe a little bit too much. So very, very interesting. I can't help but wonder whether this is a bit of a live beta test for something we might see in the second edition. They'll listen to the community and see which the community prefers, especially something like the channeling. Lots of people have been calling for dice pools to come back, and if it's popular and most of the community seem to err towards that one, maybe that will be added to the Magic phase as it is now, just to give it that little bit of an extra boost and make it a little bit more interesting. And that's still what I'm leaning to, but they all have merit, they all look good fun, and I want to try them all. The next few pages, I think, are a chaos narrative player's dream, and they explore a different way of really building some character into your chaos champions, your characters within your army, which I think is fantastic. So we get a little bit of lore about the Chainmaker's monoliths, and there's been talk about those in the lore over a number of books about the monoliths left in Holland and in other towns around after the Chaos incursions. That kind of gives you your little background and the idea of the power coming from those monoliths. And then we have a bit of the sort of explanation for what these rules are about, and that they are designed for the narrative games, and they are Chaos rewards in the old school, essentially, that you can give to your Chaos warriors and make them unique, make them your own for your own Path to Glory campaigns or your own Chaos narrative. I've done a lot of reading in this review as well as other things, and I'm going to let you pause this if you want to read all of the different Chaos rewards that are on this table, rather than reading another wall of text to you, just like I skipped reading the miscast table as well. But essentially that table relates to the two profiles you have here, and these, as it's said in the book, are very much meant for narrative play rather than for your match play games. And I imagine most players will stick to that. You may find some TOs that say, for this particular event, we want it to have a narrative theme to it, so please bring your Chaos champions as well. And I think that's what you want. You want variety within the community, within the game. But essentially we have Champions of Ruin and Chieftains of Ruin at 90 and 70 points respectively. One is a Chaos Champion, a Warrior of Chaos. One is a Beastman Brayhound's Chieftain. And you can see all the different options that you have for them there. And then you are rolling on that chart to give them their own unique abilities and make them the character that they are. You can have marks here on the Chaos Warrior, the proper named marks as well. They've not gone away. So anyone that was a little bit concerned about the change of the description of the gods in the new reprinted 1.53 core rulebook, where the Khorne and Nurgle and Slayosh and Tzeentch names have been removed and replaced with the sort of the tribal names for those gods. They are here still. Remember, they are still in the Ravening Hordes book. That's not been updated, not been replaced. They have not removed Khorne, Nurgle, Slanesh and Tzeentch from the game. It's just a different way of covering the lore. I've talked about that in a different video. I'm not going to go into any more detail here. However, don't panic. They are still here and printed in a brand new book. So they very much are still the gods. They still have those names. They've not retconned anything, so you can breathe easily. But I really like this. I really like the way that you can have there's a bit of extra character within your armies. I think is brilliant. Be brilliant for sort of small narrative battle march campaigns and things as well. I want to see these used a lot. I'd be using these in some of the small games of battle march and campaigns and things that I've got planned. I hope. I'd love to get my son involved in this with his small chaos army that he's building at the moment for battle march games. I think he could really get behind rolling up his character and seeing what gifts he gets. I think he'd really enjoy that as well. And in both cases, you can go a little bit crazy. You can pay to take your gifts, and then you can pay extra to take additional rolls on that table as well. So you imagine the conversion possibilities with both of these miniatures and really making the miniatures your own. And there's some cool things they can take as well. They can take chariots, they can have demonic mounts, they can be on dragons as well. So these are not just tiny foot characters. They really cover quite a large sort of range of roles within the game of Warhammer the Old World. A few more pictures of some of the brand new miniatures, and another little bit of lore which always leads into an Army of Infamy, and some example banners with the new name for the gods. We'll say new, the tribal names for the gods or as they understand them. And I do really like this aesthetic of whereas the shields generally look the same, they're not just bright purple or bright red or something like that, but it's the trinkets and the adornments and things that are stuck onto those shields that really show which god that they are worshipping. For all the early editions of Warhammer Fantasy, right up until 6th edition when the armies were split, we had the ability to play combined forces. They were in the same army book, and this is kind of what this Army of Infamy is doing at a touch here. You don't get all of the units available to mix and match as you want, but this Army of Infamy provides rules for a Horde of Chaos, where you can have your Chaos Warriors and your Beastmen as well. No demons, this is the difference. Obviously demons are still legacy at this time. Fingers crossed for a turn in the future. So let's whiz through the composition list. Characters: 0 to 1 Chaos Lord, Demon Prince or Beast Lord, 0 to 1 Exalted Champion, Sorcerer Lord or Great Bray Shaman per 1,000 points. Aspiring Champions: Exalted Sorcerers, Cult Magisters, Wargals, Bray Shamans and Gorbles. At least 33% of your army's points value must be spent on, I like that, +1 unit of Chaos Marauders and or Chaos Warriors, +1 unit of Gore Herds and or Ungore Herds, Chaos Cultists, new profile we'll see in a moment, and Chaos Warhounds. If your general is a Chaos Lord, Exalted Champion or Demon Prince, 0 to 1 unit of Chosen Chaos Warriors may be taken as a core choice. If your general is a Beast Lord or Wargore, 0 to 1 Bestigor Herd per 1,000 points may be taken as a core choice. Special: up to 33% of your army's points value may be spent on Marauder Horsemen, Chaos Knights and Chaos Chariots. If your general is a Chaos Lord, Exalted Champion or Demon Prince, 0 to 1 unit of Chosen Chaos Knights may be taken as a special choice. Rare: up to 33% of your army's points value, again 0 to 1 Dragon Ogre Shaggoth, Chaos Spawn, Minotaur Herds, Dragon Ogres, Chimeras, Chaos Giants, Cygors and Gorgons. As usual, you've got your little box there. 25 points for your BSB can be Aspiring Champion or a Wargore, and then magic items can be taken from the standard lists or from the individual army list for those armies as well. So a quick look at these special rules. We have Unholy Union. Whilst within 6 inches of a friendly Beastmen Brayherd unit, whereas a Chaos units but not characters, may re-roll any rolls to hit of a natural 1. Whilst within 6 inches of a Chaos Warriors unit, Beastmen Brayherds, but not characters, may re-roll any rolls of a natural 1. In addition, whilst a unit from one army list, Warriors of Chaos or Beastmen Brayherds, is within 6 inches of a friendly unit drawn from either other army list, it may apply a -1 modifier to the result of any flee roll. There's lots of units that aren't affected by that, obviously all characters, and then Spawn and Warhounds and Dragon Ogres and Dragon Ogre Shaggoths and Giants, etc. They don't get the benefit of that rule. For the Dark Gods, if a character with a Hordes and Chaos army kills their opponent in a challenge, they must immediately roll on the Gaze of Gods table. In addition, once per game, your general may re-roll d6 when rolling on the Gaze of Gods table. I think that's really fun, really thematic, sometimes really good, sometimes problematic, but it really shows the theme of the army list. There's this rise in chaos, power and magic at the moment that has drawn these two forces together, and that is some of the outcomes for that. So your really kind of big benefits. Untrusting allies still has that element that they don't know each other or get on with each other as well as might be expected. Warriors of Chaos characters cannot join a Beastmen Brayherd unit, nor can Beastmen Brayherd characters join a Warriors of Chaos unit, and neither can join a unit of Chaos Cultists. In addition, Chaos Warriors units cannot use the leadership characteristic of Beastmen Brayherd's characters, nor can Beastmen Brayherd units use the leadership of characteristic of Chaos Warriors. It's all pretty straightforward there, and I think the kind of things is pretty predictable. Finally, the shadow grows for each character in your army includes that has a mark of chaos other than a mark of chaos undivided. It must also include a non-character unit of the same mark of chaos and vice versa. For example, if your army includes 2 characters with the mark of Khorne, it must also include 2 non-character units with the mark of Khorne. Let's have a look at the 2 new units that you can use in that army list as well. Both of these profiles really lean into that cultist theme, and I really like this. This is that change of lore I was talking about earlier in this review. The fact that the Empire wasn't so aware of chaos or forgotten about the potency of chaos at the beginning of this timeline, beginning of the games period, and now after repeated invasion by Friedel and the forces in the north, the power of chaos, the power of magic is rising, and with that there are no doubt human cultists starting to worship those gods as the spread throughout the northern areas of the Empire. I think that is really, really fantastic. Warriors of Chaos Cult Magister. It's 55 points, movement 4, weapons skill 5, ballistic skill 2, strength toughness 4, 2 wounds, 4 initiative, 2 attacks, and a leadership of 8. Comes on a 25 by 25 base. Essentially, a human has a sacrificial dagger. They are a level 1 wizard. Every Cult Magister knows spells from one of the following laws of magic: demonology or dark magic. They have a few basic weapon options. You can have an additional hand weapon or a flail, and a Cult Magister may have the ambitious special rule apply for +5 points and may purchase magic items up to the value of 25 points. Their special rules are Law of Chaos, Mark of Chaos Undivided, and then we have Sacrifice and Thralls of Chaos. The Thralls of Chaos, a Cult Magister, cannot be your general and can only join a unit with the Dark Pawns, a special rule. And then Sacrifice, this special rule can only be used by a Cult Magister that has joined a unit. Before making a casting roll, this model may sacrifice one model belonging to this model's unit is immediately removed from play as a casualty. This model may then modify the casting roll by adding the wounds characteristic of the sacrifice model to the result. The sacrificial dagger is a strength as user -1 AP, strikes first, and it says you can represent the unit in your games by using Empire kits and various Beastman Brayher kits. So again, like I mentioned, really representing the incursion of chaos into the areas of Empire, maybe some of those villages closer to the Great Forests. The Warriors of Chaos, Chaos Cultists are the unit really that goes with that basic character. So we have Cultists and Apostles. Cultists are 6 points, Apostle is +7 points to the unit. They are human stats, essentially, with leadership 6 and 7. 5 to 20 for the unit size. There is a maximum unit size there. I'm guessing that is possibly to limit the number of sacrifices that can be done, but who knows. Mixed weapons, which count as 2 hand weapons, not two-handed, 2 hand weapons and throwing weapons, and then you can exchange those for a hand weapon and a short bow for free if you want to, and you can upgrade one model to Apostle, a champion for that 7 points that I've already mentioned. Their special rules are ambushes, dark pawns, which means they can be sacrificed, quite important, Mark of Chaos Undivided, open order, skirmishes, unseen threat, and warband. Dark Pawns. Friendly units do not have to make a panic test when this unit is destroyed or breaks and flees from combat whilst within 6 inches of it, nor do friendly units have to make a panic test when fled through by this unit. So basically they don't mean anything. This is fun. Unseen threat. If a unit is held in reserve, you may apply a +1 or a -1 modifier to the result when rolling to determine if it arrives this turn as reinforcements or is delayed. In addition, a unit with this special rule must be placed more than 4 inches away from an enemy unit when arriving from reserve rather than a usual 8. That's pretty fun. Absolutely love those additions for a number of reasons. One, because it adds loads of flavour to that army of infamy, but most because it really sits within this slight shift in that lore, or the development of that lore, of that story. We all know, as I've banged on about a lot in this book so far, that Friedel's been invading and re-invading, and that it's changing, it's growing now, the magic is growing, and that the Empire and the humans and the rest of them, maybe the people of the central old world, are starting to wake up and realise that there's something bigger going on here, and this is even travelling down to the humans that live in those areas. They are being affected by the gods, they are falling to the gods, they are becoming cultists and worshipping, and this stuff wasn't really talked about right at the beginning of this game. It was very much the people of the Empire weren't quite aware of what was going with the Chaos Gods. They'd forgotten about them, and unless they live close to the forest, they probably forgotten about Beastmen as well. But this is kind of the reawakening, the start of the move of that lore and the way the game works because of it back towards that slightly higher chaotic threat, which is really, really fun. Now, the book probably should be done there, but we have yet more, and we have some common items that can be taken by any army. They are corrupted items. The theme is all around this chaos theme, so they fit maybe more with your chaos armies than they do with your elves, but technically you could take them. Quite like the idea of having them some slightly corrupted or mercenary type forces of Empire as well, but we'll go through them briefly, and I'm no doubt you will read them in more detail when you pick up the book for yourself. Starting with magic weapons, Sword of Reaving, 50 points, strength +1, -1 AP, extra attacks D3, and magical attacks. After making their attacks, the wielder of this weapon has failed to cause any wounds. They suffer D3 strength forfeits at -1 AP. Isle of Rex, 45 points, strength plus 2, minus 2 AP, armor bane 1, magical attacks, multiple wounds 2, seems pretty tasty. The strength modifier and armor bane 1 special rule apply only against enemy models the wielder has charged this turn. Should the wielder make any rolls to wound of a natural 1 during the combat phase, their initiative is reduced by 1 to a maximum of 1 for the remainder of the game. And there is the things that tone it down just a touch. Grim Verdict, that's a funny name for a weapon, 40 points, strength plus 3, armor piercing minus 1, armor bane 2, furious charge, impetuous, magical attacks, requires 2 hands and strikes lasts. Though the wielder should lose a round of combat, they suffer a single wound with no armor save permitted. Ward and regen saves can be attempted as normal. Hunter's Scorn, 20 points. Range 30, strength 5, minus 1 AP, armor bane 1, magical attacks, multiple shots 2. Should an enemy model with wounds characteristic of 2 or more suffer 1 or more unsaved wounds from this weapon, they and their unit suffer a minus 1 modifier to their initiative characteristic to a minimum of 1 for the remainder of the game. However, if the wielder of the Hunter of Scorn fails to wound their target, this effect is lost. Magic Armor, Armor of Dark Faith, 40 points. Models whose troop type is infantry and cavalry only. The Armor of Dark Faith is a suit of light armor. In addition, the wearer may re-roll any failed armor saves. However, if the wearer of Armor of Dark Faith loses a wound, this effect is lost and counts as light armor for the rest of the game. Scale of False Promise, 35 points. Models whose troop type is infantry or cavalry only. The Scale of False Promise is a suit of heavy armor. The wearer improves their toughness and wounds characteristics by 1, but becomes subject to the stupidity rule. If the wearer already suffers from stupidity, they must apply a +1 modifier to the dice roll every time they make a stupidity test. Mantle of Drifting Shadow, 20 points. Models whose troop type is infantry only. The Mantle of Drifting Shadow is a suit of light armor. The wearer cannot be targeted by shooting or spells more than 6 inches away. In addition, they improve their movement characteristic by 1, but gain the Loner special rule. Talismans. Amulet of Spell Attraction, 25 points. Once per turn, when a friendly unit within the bearer's command range is targeted by a magic missile or a hex, the bearer may make a leadership test. If the test is passed, the bearer may choose to redirect the spell into themselves rather than the original target, even if they are out of range or would not normally be eligible for the target. The spell is then resolved with the bearer of the amulet as its target. Periapt of Soul Exchange, 20 points. Single use, during the command subphase of their turn, the bearer of the Periapt of Soul Exchange may channel its power. If they do, D3 friendly models from the bearer's command range are removed from players' casualties and the bearer recovers that many lost wounds. That's a bit of fun. Magical Standards. The Banner of the Dark Heart, 50 points. When required to make a fear, panic or terror test, a unit carrying this standard may roll an extra d6 and discard the highest result. However, a unit carrying this banner cannot benefit from the General's Inspiring Special Rule. Standard of the Fell Warrior, 15 points. Single use. During the remaining move subphase, a unit carrying this standard may perform a free redress the ranks maneuver immediately before moving. Once this maneuver is complete, the unit moves as normal but cannot turn or perform a quick turn. On to enchanted items. Ring of Doom, 25 points. The bearer of the Ring of Doom can cast the Doombolt spell from the Law of Dark Magic as a bound spell with a power level of 2. However, each time the spell is successfully cast, your opponent rolls a d6. On a roll of 4+, the bearer reduces their toughness characteristic by 1 to a minimum of 1. Demon Blooded Steed, 15 points. Models whose troop type is cavalry only. The bearer's mount improves its movement, strength and attacks characteristics by 1 to a maximum of 10, but gains the impetuous special rule. Elixir of Power, single use during the command subphase of their turn. The bearer of Elixir of Power can consume it until their next start of turn subphase. The model has a +1 modifier to their strength, attacks and initiative characteristics to a maximum of 10. Once this effect ends, the bearer loses a single wound. This wound cannot be recovered by a regeneration save. Arcane items. Rod of Might, 50 points. The bearer of the Rod of Might may apply a +1 modifier to any of their casting results. However, the bearer will suffer a miscast if a double of 1 or 2 is rolled while making a casting roll rather than the usual natural double 1. Scroll of Invocation, 30 points. 0 to 1 per wizard. Single use, the bearer may use this scroll instead of making a casting roll. If they do, the spell is cast as if the caster rolled a minimum casting value of the spell. The spell rolls may be attempted as normal. Infernal Familiar, 25 points. The owner of the Infernal Familiar may select either Doombolt or Winds of Chaos. See page 83 of Ravening Hordes, in addition to other spells they know. However, should the wizard suffer a miscast while casting the selected spell, they cannot cast it again for the remainder of the game, in addition to any other effects from the miscast table. With such a magic heavy book, it's only fitting we finish with a wonderful picture of the new Chaos Dragon ridden by the Chaos Sorcerer, but we're all done. Wow, what a really busy book. There's a lot going on in there, and I think most of it really good. I think this is one of the better journals. It delivers quite a lot. There is an army of infamy in there, which gives us another way to play, which is very common within these books. I don't know how competitive it will be. I have no idea. My brain's not wired that way, and I'm looking forward to finding out in the comments if any of you have seen any cool combos and things. But even if it's not a competitive army, for tournament players it doesn't matter, because there are competitive ways of playing these miniatures. I think it adds theme, and a theme that was needed in the game, and I really, really like it. And that theme is throughout the book. That theme is chaos, and chaos on the rise. And not just a hint, there's invasions happening all the time and people are wondering what's going on. It feels like the world is fully waking up. And we saw lots of that with the Cathay releases. Miao Ying is coming to the Empire and telling the Empire this is a big thing. And this feels like that step in that direction of the Empire actually realizing it. And while there's not much written from their perspective in that, there is enough hints of that. And then the rise in magic and the winds of magic is reflected in all of these rules in the book as well. And those rules are great. They're really good fun. There's lots in there, and that's the only head scratching bit. It feels like a little bit, it's not overwhelming maybe. Some people it might be overwhelming. I would say it's an optional thing, as it says in the book, and just try them out, have some fun with them, but don't overly worry about them. The competitive side of the community will no doubt test and work out whether any of these can be used, and like I mentioned a little bit earlier in the video, I wonder if we are being used as a little bit of a test for potential things in the future, be that second or even a third edition. And I quite like the idea that the channeling rules there could just be applied to the standard game. I think it would work, and whether you see that new miscast table being standard or a sort of a cross between the two, I don't know. Maybe you can play those channeling rules without unbalancing the game too much. It definitely moves magic in a higher ebb. It's lower in terms of the lore up until now, but also in terms of the gameplay. Magic doesn't dominate quite as much as it did in 8th edition. Some people really enjoyed that. Some people didn't like that quite as much. I'm more of a units kind of guy than a magic kind of guy, but even I think that the rules in here are good fun, and I'm looking forward to trying them. I love the build your own Chaos Warrior thing for narrative play. That's really cool to see that in this book alongside. It'd be so easy to add a couple more pictures pages rather than have that in there. And I really like the new profiles that are in there. It gives extra flavor, and again reinforces what I keep talking about, coming back to that idea that chaos is starting to spread within the Empire, where at the beginning of the story, beginning of the timeline, almost beginning of the launch of the game, we were told that wasn't the case, and the game is moving forward. And I think that's really cool and really exciting. The common magic items are really fun and themed really, really well. I'm not sure that the game needs more common magic items, or the book needed it. There's enough in there already. It would have felt full enough, and a few more pages of lore going into the details around the Empire's perspective on it would have been welcome from my point of view, but that's just my personal perspective. Adding more rules to the game is always a good thing when they're not all overpowered, and I don't think they are. I think they're balanced nicely in a way anything corrupted would be. There's your benefit, but by the way, it's going to hurt you here, and that might be why my first impression is they're not a list of stuff that's going to be used by all the competitive players. It's more thematic and fun, which is what so much of this book is about. So all in all, it's up there for me with one of the better things, and I think that the connection between the lore, the narrative throughout the book, and the rules is maybe one of the best connections yet. It's really, really well done. I still want more of the lore and the narrative, and it's probably not the rules designers' fault that we're missing a bit of that. We're missing Black Library support at the moment, and we probably should have had 3 or 4 novels by now, and a war in Westerland style novel that gives us that kind of political detail and understanding of all of this stuff is really needed. Maybe not needed as part of this review, but please, if anyone's watching, get it done. We need it. But go enjoy this book, go and pick it up. Hopefully you enjoy it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Maybe you've picked it up already. Maybe you're just watching reviews and you're deciding whether you want to buy it. But let me know your initial thoughts in the comments. Really, really interested to hear. If you're still watching now, you can't have hated the video that much, so please do give it a like. Give it a comment, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. If you want to support me on the channel, there are channel memberships switched on now. It's like a basic level. On there is a bit of a tip jar, a thank you. You do get access to a couple of sort of behind the scenes diary videos. All the real action is over on Patreon if you want to support me on the channel there. The lowest tier in Patreon gives you slightly more than the memberships, but I know not everyone wants to sign up to Patreon, but if you can support me over on Patreon, that'd be fantastic. First couple of tiers are all about supporting me. The top two, I do painting stuff because most of this channel is painting and hobby, and I do painting coaching, including Zoom sessions as well. So do go and check out the Patreon and all the different ways you can support me and the channel. Check out the channel sponsor, Counter Attack Bases, as well. All those links are in the video description. But thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.